California, land of gold fever, Spanish galleons, outlaw hideouts, and dreams of buried fortune. For more than a century, treasure hunters have scoured its coasts, mountains, and deserts, convinced that unimaginable riches still lie hidden beneath the Golden State. Tonight, we crack open the dusty pages of old treasure hunting magazines to bring you some of the most intriguing lost treasure legends California has ever known. Some important and valuable treasures in California have yet to come to light, and one of the largest waiting to be found is that left by Tom Bell, the enigmatic Robin Hood-like figure who became the most feared highwayman of the 1850s. Tom Bell was a puzzle. When captured, he only had $10 on him, despite having stolen and robbed nearly $500,000. His crimes were assisted by a gang of ruthless cutthroats, most of whom wasted their shares of the ill-gotten wealth on women and whiskey. But not Tom Bell. Unlike his companions, he hoarded most of his stolen fortune, and none of his reportedly buried treasure has ever been found to this day. Bell's story began around 1847 when he left his hometown of Rome, Tennessee, to fight in the Mexican War under Colonel Cheatham's Tennessee Volunteers. After the war ended, he was drawn to California by the news of gold discovered at Sutter's Mill near Coloma. Arriving in San Francisco barely out of his teens, Bell claimed to be a doctor of medicine named Thomas J. Hodges. With about a year's experience as a field orderly during the war, he had developed enough medical knowledge to extract bullets from wounds and treat injuries. Though much too young to hold a medical degree, San Francisco accepted him as a doctor. Carrying a medical bag, and often guns, he wandered the city. However, Bell's interest in medicine quickly waned. Instead, he turned to gambling and possibly even pimping to survive. Women were captivated by his charm, and with good reason. He was over 6 feet tall and strikingly handsome. His looks, however, were marred by a jealous girlfriend who, in a fit of rage, swung a shovel at him, smashing his face so severely that his once handsome smile twisted into a sinister leer. The scars from his crushed nose and split skin were so horrifying that some women fainted at the sight of him. Now desperate and rejected by society, Bell could no longer rely on gambling or charming others. However, he refused to labor as a miner, harboring disdain for manual work. Instead, he resorted to crime, robbing a tavern's till. He was caught and imprisoned on Angel Island, as San Quentin Prison had not yet been built. The warden, Jack Hayes, recorded his name as Tom Bell, an alias that Hodges himself came to prefer. In prison, Bell shared a cell with an experienced thief named Gristy, who was serving 10 years for a robbery in Placer County. In exchange for Gristy's knowledge of the outlaw life, Bell promised that they would break out together. Bell taught Gristy how to fake severe cramps to convince the guards he had dysentery, and when the guards let them off the island, the two escaped and vanished into San Francisco. After their escape, Bell built up a gang specializing in small holdups throughout the San Joaquin Valley. His crew included notorious figures like Ned Connor, Jim Smith, Bob Carr, and a dangerous man known as Monty Jack, whose real name was Montague Lyon. Together, they expanded their operations. Working in shifts, Bell's gang bewildered lawmen and settlers by committing multiple robberies at nearly the same time. While some gang members raided a ranch house in the mother lode of Placer County near Auburn, others were robbing travelers near Nevada City or Grass Valley. One of Bell's favored hideouts was the Mountaineer House, located between Folsom and Auburn, managed by an ex-convict named Tack Phillips. Bell would often flee to the Mountaineer House after a robbery, successfully confusing the authorities. Though deputies often suspected him, they rarely managed to catch him. It is believed that much of Tom Bell's fortune remains hidden around the Mountaineer House. But he concealed his treasure so skillfully that not even Phillips, the man managing the inn, knew where to look. The Mountaineer House has long since faded into oblivion, and its location may now lie beneath the waters of Folsom Lake, which formed when Folsom Dam was constructed in 1955. However, a careful study of the Sacramento Union, the Auburn Journal, Bancroft's History of California, and the history of Nevada and Yuba counties during the 1850s offers intriguing clues about where some of Tom Bell's hidden loot might still be concealed. These documents can be found at the California State Library in Sacramento, the Bancroft Library in Berkeley, and other major libraries throughout California and the western states. One thing that could be said about Tom Bell: he was a hoarder, not a spender. Though occasionally generous, even giving coins to the poor a few times, which earned him the underserved title of a Robin Hood-like character, he mostly clung tightly to his ill-gotten gains. He preferred to hide the bulk of his earnings from robberies rather than squander them. When Bell and his gang completed a holdup, he would divide the loot as soon as they could meet at a designated rendezvous point. He robbed numerous stagecoaches around Volcanoville, Placerville, and at French Corral. But after lawmen caught on to his methods, Bell abandoned the Mountaineer House and moved to the Western Exchange Hotel along the old Sacramento, Nevada City Road, which is now State Route 49, northeast of its junction with Interstate 80. The hotel was a key stop for stagecoaches, allowing Bell to gather useful information about stage schedules and wealthy passengers. During his time at the Western Exchange Hotel, he grew even richer as one robbery followed another. With each successful theft, Bell grew bolder and more ruthless. At one point, a posse was formed by men from Placer and Nevada counties, determined to capture him. They nearly succeeded after Bell brazenly robbed the general store on the outskirts of Silver City. During the heist, he took $70 from the store while also robbing several stagecoach passengers sleeping outside due to the town's overcrowded lodgings. When a few guests tried to resist, Bell struck them, leaving several with split scalps. Showing his twisted sense of humor and his fraudulent claim of being a doctor, he even applied compresses to their wounds before making his escape. As he fled, Bell barely managed to evade a group of men drawn to the scene by gunshots from the Grizzly House. Among the victims was a woman named Elizabeth Hood, who had been traveling with her 14-year-old daughter Sarah, a buxom girl who craved adventure and the thrill of danger. For weeks, Bell continued to use the Western Exchange Hotel as a base to gather information. However, when the law got too close, he chose to hide out in a secluded area near the town of Snyder. According to Mrs. Elizabeth Hood, who was later arrested, one of Bell's preferred hideouts was a cave somewhere in the Mother Lode region. Though she didn't know its exact location, some believe it could have been Mercer Caverns near Murphy's or Moaning Cave about 4 miles south of Vallecito. On August 11, 1856, Tom Bell planned to execute the most ambitious crime of his life. He intended it to be the grand finale, one last daring heist that would surpass all his previous exploits. Unbeknownst to his gang members, Bell had already decided it would be his last job. His crew had grown too large and unruly, with some demanding bigger cuts of the spoils. Worse yet, the law was closing in on him, and he feared that the substantial reward on his head might tempt one of his own men to betray him. What Bell truly desired was one enormous score that would set him up for life. With the wealth he intended to steal, combined with the other sums he had buried throughout the region, he planned to return to the Western Exchange Hotel and elope with Sarah Hood to distant Los Angeles, where he dreamed of starting a new life. Thus we come to the 6-horse stage traveling from Camptonville to Marysville, moving along the winding road crowded with passengers. Among them was an extra man riding shotgun beside driver John Gear, a sharpshooting lawman named Dobson, who had been sworn in at Camptonville to protect the stage with his life. The reason for Dobson's presence was a chest containing over $100,000 in coins and bills on board, one of the largest shipments of its kind ever carried by a stagecoach, destined for a Marysville bank. Unbeknownst to Bell, the Langton Express Company, experienced in handling money shipments, had been tipped off that he might attempt a daring robbery. The ambush took place a few miles outside Marysville, where the twisting road descended from the hills to the valley. Bell had 6 men with him. In the ensuing gunfight, Dobson proved his heroism by standing up as Bell emerged from the bushes to seize the lead team's reins, immediately opening fire. At least 2 of Bell's men fell from Dobson's deadly aim, but passengers were also caught in the crossfire. One woman, Mrs. Tillman, was killed instantly when a bullet from Bell's gun struck her in the forehead. Despite Bell's attempt, he failed to secure the $100,000. As the shooting began, John Gear whipped the horses into a desperate run, and the stagecoach hurtled toward Marysville, leaving Bell and his men to flee. The death of Mrs. Tillman enraged the citizens of California, prompting one of the largest posses in the West to hunt down Bell. The manhunt was successful thanks to a critical mistake. Bell had contacted Sarah Hood. First, he retreated to a cavern, dismantling his gang, and then followed the banks of the San Joaquin River to a prearranged rendezvous point with Sarah. Bell was among the last of his gang to be captured in early October of 1856. Without his leadership, the remaining outlaws made blunders that led to their arrests or deaths, often by lynching. Few of them had any money when caught, all claiming that Bell had kept the lion's share of the stolen fortune, but none knew where he had hidden it. Sarah Hood had received a letter from Bell instructing her to follow the upper San Joaquin River southward to where it met the Merced River. There, she was to find a small shack where Bell intended to meet her, marry her at a nearby mission, retrieve his hidden wealth, and escape to the south. Tom Bell was only 26 years old and dreaming of a fresh start. When finally captured, Bell was taken to the town of Firebaugh. There, he was questioned and allowed to write a few letters before being hanged from a sycamore tree on the banks of the San Joaquin River. A year later, a flood washed away the wooden plaque marking his grave. But what of the Bell treasure? It remains missing to this day. Tom Bell stubbornly refused to reveal the location of his wealth. Some researchers believe it could be buried near Folsom Lake, Pardee Reservoir, Mercer Caverns, Moaning Cave, or somewhere along the San Joaquin River near Lathrop. Mrs. Elizabeth Hood insisted she had received nothing more from Bell than payment for room and board, and while Sarah Hood had been given trinkets, there was no money. Tom Bell had done an exceptional job of hiding what has been estimated to be between $250,000 and $500,000. Whether it will ever be found is anyone's guess. Countless amateur sleuths have pored over every word ever written about Tom Bell, but no one has managed to uncover his fortune. One thing is certain, he didn't spend much of what he stole, and he preferred to bury his loot. That's a well-known fact, but finding the lost treasure of Tom Bell remains as elusive as the man himself. Since the daring Argonauts of '49 carved their desperate path across the unforgiving wasteland later named Death Valley, legends of immense mineral wealth have taken root and spread throughout the region. The very names of the towering mountain barriers that encircle the valley reflect its formidable nature. The Panamint Range to the west, the ominously named Black and Funeral Mountains to the east, the Grapevines to the north, and the Cottonwoods and Last Chance Range forming its rugged boundary. Even today, these landscapes remain perilous to the unprepared and the unwary. Among the many tales of treasure whispered in these mountains, one stands out, though it is less known than others: the legend of the lost octagonal gold pieces. Despite lacking formal documentation, this legend has persisted for nearly a century. I first heard of these peculiar gold coins from my friend Dan Thomas in Indian Wells Valley. His account led me to Dr. James Henry, a chiropractor in our town, who, in turn, directed me to Everett Bean and his wife Thelma, both avid treasure hunters. Though Everett ran a jewelry store in town, his true passion lay in prospecting and seeking out lost riches. The next clue in our search came from Burdett Fox, son of Ridgecrest pioneer Joe Fox. For the record, Burdett had actually met the central figure in the story of the lost octagonal gold pieces, which, according to all four of my sources, unfolded as follows. Sometime in the 1800s, a wealthy Mexican family embarked on a journey through the harsh terrain of Death Valley, bound for the fertile coastal lands of California. They traveled with 3 or 4 wagons packed with provisions, household goods, and valuables, accompanied by their peons and driving well-fed livestock. Unbeknownst to them, hostile eyes had been tracking their progress. As the caravan navigated a narrow, treacherous canyon along an old emigrant trail, an ambush was set. The towering rock walls provided the perfect trap, leaving the travelers with no escape. When the attack was over, only 2 young children survived. The rest of the party had been slaughtered. Rather than killing the children, the attackers, believed to be a renegade band of Native Americans, took them as captives. After looting the wagons and scattering what they could not carry, they set the remains ablaze and vanished into the mountains, driving their stolen livestock ahead of them. Years later, when the boy had grown into a man, he recalled his harrowing past. He remembered how the tribesmen, fascinated by the brilliance of the gold coins from his parents' chest, wore them as ornaments. Eventually, as the encroaching presence of white prospectors stirred unease, the tribal chief ordered that the coins be hidden. The gold was gathered into an empty barley sack and cast into a deep crevice between two massive boulders in the secluded canyon where the tribe had made their hidden camp. A stream ran through this canyon, attracting game while the surrounding slopes provided pine nuts, an essential food source. The children, now accustomed to life among their captors, lived in uneasy peace until one day, news arrived that more outsiders had been spotted approaching the mountain they called Tucky, their word for mountain sheep. Fear gripped the tribe. The white children were suddenly forbidden to roam freely, lest their presence be discovered and raise uncomfortable questions. That night, as the fire crackled in the hidden camp, uncertainty loomed over them all. That night at the campfire hidden from sight, the boy, known as Two, later anglicized as Toski, overheard a chilling conversation. The tribe had decided his and his sister's fate. Fearing that one day white men might discover the children and learn of the massacre, they were convinced that swift and brutal retribution would follow. To protect themselves, they had resolved to eliminate the last living witnesses. Realizing the imminent danger, Toski wasted no time. He rushed to find his sister, grabbed a handful of pine nuts from a nearby basket for sustenance, and led her away under the cover of darkness. He did not seek out white settlers, for he feared them nearly as much as he feared the vengeful warriors who would surely pursue them. Instead, he focused on putting as much distance as possible between themselves and their captors. Days passed, and when no pursuers appeared, Toski knew they had escaped safely. The children survived on pine nuts, lizards, snakes, and whatever else Toski could catch. His years among the tribe had taught him how to find hidden springs to quench their thirst, and he took every precaution to leave no trace of their path. Eventually, they reached the well-traveled trails at the base of the great snow-capped Sierra Nevada. There, kind-hearted miners and prospectors found them and took them to Tehachapi, a small settlement further south, on the way to the pueblo of Los Angeles. The siblings remained in Tehachapi as they grew into adulthood, but Toski never forgot that somewhere in the Panamint Mountains, his parents' gold lay buried. As the years passed, he remained convinced that he could recall the exact location of the treasure. With the renegade Indians long gone from their former strongholds, Toski finally felt safe enough to return and search for the hidden canyon, the twin boulders, and the deep crevice where the octagonal gold pieces had been concealed. He made several attempts, venturing back into the rugged terrain, but despite his best efforts, he was never able to rediscover the precise spot. Today, those rare octagonal gold coins are valued at an astonishing $1,000 apiece. Burdett Fox, who passed away recently, had heard this tale firsthand from old Toski himself nearly 30 years ago when the two became friends in the desert town of Trona, near the dry expanse of Searles Lake. Thelma Bean, one of the treasure hunters intrigued by the legend, has her own theory about the lost hoard. She believes she has seen the massive cleft rocks in Hall's Canyon on the western side of the Panamints. Only someone's already blasted the rock trying to reach the bottom, she says. There's a lot of debris still in the way, but whoever did it must have thought they were onto something. Today, Hall's Canyon is part of an Indian reservation, once home to a man known as Indian George. He was one of the original inhabitants of the region, and as a young boy, had reportedly watched the ill-fated emigrants as they struggled through Death Valley and up into the mountain passes. Indian George is even mentioned in historical accounts of Death Valley. Over time, my team and I have explored numerous canyons in the Panamint Mountains, retracing the paths where Indian George claimed to have seen the emigrants pass. The region remains a vast and mineral-rich land, yielding gold, silver, and copper. Here, countless veins and ledges of precious metals have been discovered, only to be lost again. Boomtowns once flourished, then crumbled into dust, leaving behind only whispers of forgotten riches and enduring legends that continue to lure treasure hunters. When we received an invitation from George Sutherland of China Lake to join a four-wheel expedition into the remote northern reaches of the Panamints, we eagerly accepted. This was a golden opportunity to survey the land, keep our eyes open for potential clues, and identify promising locations for a more thorough search in the future. Interestingly, Grotto, a prospector from the early 1900s, once claimed that he had worked at the Tucky gold mine. This mine, which operated from the early 1900s until 1935, sits within the same mountains where the legend of the lost octagonal gold pieces was born. Whether the treasure remains buried beneath those twin boulders or has been lost forever to time in the shifting desert, one thing is certain: the Panamint Mountains still guard their secrets well. Gold had once been discovered in the upper reaches of Tucky Mountain, and the ore was processed with cyanide on site. Water, essential for this operation, had been painstakingly piped in from springs on the western slopes of the mountain. As our caravan made its way through Panamint Valley, we caught sight of Hall's Canyon beyond Ballarat, the ghost town that had once served as a supply hub for the Panamint mines. Gazing at the rugged landscape, I turned to my husband, Al, and remarked, "Just look at all those canyons. There must be at least 1,000 in this 49-mile stretch. Searching for those gold coins will be like looking for a needle in a haystack." He chuckled. "Elimination, my dear Mrs. Watson," he said with a grin. "Surely you don't expect to stumble upon a fortune in just a few outings, do you?" It might have sounded discouraging, but treasure hunters do occasionally strike gold. There are two primary entrances into Death Valley from the Panamint Valley side, one through Wild Rose Canyon, once known as Windy Canyon to the old burro men, and another through Town Pass farther north. Our leader chose the Wild Rose route, which suited us perfectly. As we climbed higher, we eagerly scanned the terrain, taking in every detail. The road twisted through the lower reaches before ascending a long ridgeline. As we descended into Emigrant Canyon, George pointed out some ancient petroglyphs carved into the brown rock wall east of the highway. Just a short distance down the western side, we spotted Emigrant Springs, now maintained and piped by the Park Service. I couldn't help but wonder, could this have been the very canyon where Toski's people were ambushed so long ago? Or had it been farther down? The old emigrant traders had no established road to follow. They had to forge their own path, choosing the easiest route as they went. Examining the rugged country with this in mind, I could easily imagine this section of the Panamints as the ideal setting for an ambush. Emigrant Canyon Road eventually merges into Town Pass Road, just above the northern reaches of Death Valley itself. Our safari trail wound across the lower foothills of Tucky Mountain, about 2 miles from Emigrant Springs. It quickly became clear why only four-wheel drive vehicles had been invited. Our path was a rough, water-worn course that barely passed for a road. Even with high clearance, there were moments when it was questionable whether we'd be able to push forward. This was a route meant only for seasoned backcountry explorers, those prepared to use raw muscle and shovels to carve a way through if needed. The narrow canyon terrain fascinated us. A sheer cliff loomed on one side, while a smaller ridge hemmed us in on the other, creating a tight passage. Caves and overhangs dotted the rock face, and it wasn't hard to imagine that if the Indians had once sought refuge in the hidden recesses of Tucky Mountain, they had chosen wisely. Long ago, streams must have coursed through these canyons, and spring sites were still visible, evidence that this had once been a prime habitat for both game and birds. As we moved deeper into the wilderness, we even startled a small herd of mountain sheep from their sheltered perch. But it was when we reached the summit that my pulse quickened. From this vantage point, one could oversee all movement in the valley below, a perfect observation post. Here, in absolute secrecy and safety, warriors could have plotted an ambush, watching and waiting for the right moment to strike. Of course, this trip wasn't meant to be a treasure hunt. It was an expedition for pure exploration and enjoyment. We would have to return on our own now that we knew how to access this hidden road leading into Tucky's secret domain. Today was about wandering through the abandoned mines, feasting on delicious venison steaks, courtesy of George Sutherland, alongside our picnic lunch, and reveling in the privilege of experiencing a place few ever get the chance to see. Yet, as we climbed among the giant boulders and scrambled through the canyons of Tucky Mountain, I couldn't shake a lingering question. Had old Toski, 30 years ago, ever thoroughly explored these mountains as a possible location for an Indian campsite? Had he searched beyond just a single canyon, or a secluded valley littered with rocks and boulders of every imaginable size? There was only one way to find out if our theory held any truth: return to this remote place with a plan to spend as much time as necessary, carefully exploring every potential clue. The Central Sierra Nevada, stretching south of Lake Tahoe, north of Kings Canyon and roughly east of Yosemite, is a land of breathtaking beauty. Clean, snow-scoured granite, broken here and there by patches of ancient lava, rises in steep, unbroken sweeps from the Owens Valley to the Sierra Crest, towering more than a mile above. It is among the world's most spectacular landscapes. Along the eastern slope, clear streams wind through endless pine forests. Fish and game are abundant, and the air is so pure it might tempt any city dweller to abandon their polluted home for good. Somewhere in this vast wilderness, near the headwaters of the Owens River, lies one of the richest and most elusive lost mines in history: the Lost Cement Mine. Known to have been discovered and lost at least 4 different times, this legendary mine was once worked successfully for 8 consecutive summers before vanishing once again. Like many famous lost mines, the lost cement is wrapped in a haze of strange and conflicting stories, some true, some half-true, and some pure legend. As the years pass, separating fact from fiction becomes even more difficult. A young Mark Twain, then a reporter in Virginia City, Nevada, became intrigued by the story and added his own contribution to the legend in his classic work, Roughing It. The tale of the lost cement mine likely began around 1857, although even the exact year remains disputed. At that time, the region south of Lake Tahoe was largely unexplored, known only to a few trappers and to the military party of Captain John C. Fremont, with Kit Carson as their guide. Into this untamed wilderness came 3 young men, reportedly brothers of German descent, though their names have long since been forgotten. They were survivors of a brutal Paiute Indian attack somewhere east of the mountains. Having narrowly escaped, they wandered across the sage flats of Nevada, desperately seeking passage across the Sierra to the safety of California's gold fields. By the time they reached the eastern slopes of the Sierra Nevada, the brothers were weak from hunger, footsore, and near despair. Still wary of their Paiute pursuers, they moved cautiously along the massive eastern wall of the range until they found the gap where the Owens River flows, a possible route westward. Turning upstream, they struggled toward the summit, drinking deeply from the river after weeks in the dry desert, yet still battling starvation. One night, utterly exhausted, they camped beside a spring that flowed from a shallow cave. The next morning, one of the brothers stumbled upon a ledge of rusty reddish material, resembling hardened cement and veined with shining bits of metal. Convinced it was gold, he eagerly filled his pockets with the ore. His brothers, skeptical or simply too exhausted to care, ignored his discovery. Their hardships continued. One brother, suffering an injury that would have been minor under normal circumstances, collapsed, unable to go any farther. The others faced a brutal choice: stay and die with him, or press on. With heavy hearts, they left him behind, hoping he might somehow recover. But fate was cruel. Soon after, the second brother collapsed and died from exhaustion, leaving only the man who carried the mysterious ore in his pockets. Against staggering odds, he fought his way over the Sierra Crest and down into the canyon of the San Joaquin River, finally reaching the settlement of Millerton. His ordeal had nearly killed him. He discarded most of the heavy ore along the way, desperate to lighten his load and survive. Although he lived, his health was permanently broken. He found occasional work, but never regained his former strength. Seeking help, he turned to doctors in San Francisco, among them a man named Dr. Randall. The young German, now penniless, was treated without charge, as Randall realized that the immigrant's time was tragically short. The young German man, suffering from advanced consumption, knew the end was near. In gratitude for the care he had received, he gave Dr. Randall everything of value he still possessed. The last remaining samples of gold ore and a hand-drawn map sketched from memory, one that marked the location of the fabled lost cement mine. Under the doctor's constant care, the young man passed away peacefully. It wasn't until 1861 that Dr. Randall, finally stirred to action, set out in search of the mine. He traveled to Monaville, near the area depicted on the map, and filed a claim on 160 acres at a site known as Pumice Flats. With high hopes, he hired a crew of 11 men, appointing Gideon F. Whiteman as foreman, and began a painstaking inch-by-inch search of the land. Unfortunately, Dr. Randall made a critical mistake. He proudly showed off the ore samples he had received from the German. This created the false impression that he had discovered gold on his claim at Pumice Flats. In those days, the mere sight of such ore could ignite a frenzy, and it did. A rush followed. Throughout the summer and fall of 1861, treasure hunters swarmed the hills for miles around. They dug, climbed, argued, drank, and toiled, all in search of a mysterious red ledge of rock, veined with pure gold, said to resemble cement. But most walked away empty-handed, Randall included. Still, one man from Randall's original crew, his identity lost to history, broke off from the group and continued the search on his own. He eventually stumbled onto something remarkable and confided in a man named Van Horn. Together, they collected samples and took them to Virginia City for assay. The results confirmed what they had hoped. It was rich gold ore. Elated, they returned to the Sierra with new supplies, ready to work the ledge, but before they could begin, they were confronted by Joaquin Jim, a Paiute chief, and a band of warriors. The chief declared the land off-limits to whites and drove them away, allowing them to keep only one horse. He warned them never to return. That winter, Van Horn fell ill in San Francisco and was unable to go back. His partner, undeterred, took a third man into his confidence and crossed the mountains again. When neither returned, Van Horn told their story to a friend, who sent two others, Kirkpatrick and Colt, to investigate. The pair located a deserted camp and the remains of two men, presumed to be Van Horn's companions. A local Native American said he had seen the men bury tools and sweep over the site, but the ledge itself was never found again. Once more, the lost cement mine had slipped into legend. For years afterward, the Paiutes were said to guard the area closely, driving away any who came near. Even as late as 1890, searchers reported feeling watched and followed while in the region. While some believed that Joaquin Jim's warriors were responsible for the deaths of Van Horn's men, several later murders tied to the hunt were believed to have been committed by white men. Back in 1861, during the height of the gold fever, a man calling himself Farnsworth arrived in Monaville. He was seeking a partner for a venture many assumed was connected to the lost cement mine. He quickly found one, but only Farnsworth returned. The assumption was that his partner had chased another lead and disappeared. Later, Farnsworth sought yet another partner. This time, the man named Hume was found murdered. Before Farnsworth could be questioned, he too vanished. After the deaths of Van Horn's and Farnsworth's partners, new developments became rare. One expedition did discover the remains of an old cabin with a rough-hewn log floor, its cracks filled with reddish earth flecked with gold. Still, no mine was found. Year after year, expeditions set out in search of the legendary Red Ledge, but none met with success, and enthusiasm waned. Yet one man never gave up: Gideon Whiteman, Dr. Randall's former foreman. Obsessed with the mystery, he dedicated his life to the search, becoming the foremost expert on the lost cement mine. Whiteman carefully studied every clue, returning to the Sierra year after year. He timed his expeditions to avoid trouble with native groups and was cautious not to be followed by other treasure seekers. But even he, despite a lifetime of effort, never found the mine. Many miners believed that Gideon Whiteman was closing in on the lost cement mine, so they shadowed his every move. Among those who observed him was none other than Mark Twain, who later wrote, "When I had my one accidental glimpse of Mr. Whiteman in Esmeralda County, he had already spent 12 or 13 years searching for the lost mine, enduring hunger, thirst, poverty, and sickness. Some believed he had found it, but most thought otherwise. I once saw a piece of cement, about the size of my fist, said to have been given to Whiteman by a young German." Twain apparently was unaware of Dr. Randall's involvement. The specimen was mesmerizing. Lumps of pure gold were embedded in it as thickly as raisins in a slice of fruitcake. Working such a mine for just a week would have been enough to make any man of modest ambitions rich. Despite years of searching, Whiteman never gave up, and the local prospectors kept tailing him right up until his death in 1881. Though he knew more about the lost cement mine than anyone else, he died penniless. There's no evidence he ever truly found the treasure he sought. Meanwhile, unknown to Whiteman and the eager miners chasing rumors, someone else had already found the lost mine and was quietly growing wealthy. This part of the story came to light only in the fall of 1877, when a man named McDougal collapsed from a stroke on the streets of San Francisco. Strangers, moved by his helpless state, took him in. Believing he was near death, McDougal shared his remarkable tale. Back in 1869, while living in the Arizona Territory, McDougal met a man named Kent. Kent told him of a rich mine he had discovered in California in 1861, but had been unable to work due to hostile Indians and other factors. Now, Kent said, he needed a trustworthy partner and offered McDougal a guaranteed salary of $1,500 a year. Eager for the opportunity, McDougal agreed, and the two set off for Stockton, California, to prepare for their expedition. By late May, they headed up the rugged San Joaquin River Trail into the Sierra Nevada, where they built a cabin near the ridge. Over the next weeks, they searched eastward until they found it, a narrow, reddish ledge heavy with gold near the headwaters of the Owens River. Kent wasted no time. Acting like a man who had always known the location, he set to work immediately. That summer alone, they extracted $40,000 worth of gold, avoiding all settlements and keeping their activities secret at Kent's insistence. At the season's end, they carefully covered their workings, melted the gold into bars valued at around $2,000 each, and distributed them discreetly among their belongings to avoid suspicion. For several summers, Kent and McDougal returned to the mine, each year recovering between $25,000 and $50,000 worth of gold. They maintained absolute secrecy, never allowing anyone to glimpse their operations. But by 1877, their solitude came to an end. New mining camps, such as Alpha and Mammoth, were springing up nearby. Realizing the danger of discovery, Kent insisted on a final, hurried extraction. They gathered as much gold as they could, packed their horses, buried all signs of their presence, and left, never to return. McDougal died soon after in San Francisco. Kent vanished without a trace. When word of McDougal's confession reached Mono County, a theory quickly spread. Kent was believed to be none other than Farnsworth, the infamous man suspected of murdering his partners years earlier. It would explain Kent's extreme secrecy. No better theory has ever been offered. After 1877, prospectors, including the persistent Gid Whiteman and his followers, continued to search the Owens River region for the lost cement mine. But Whiteman's death robbed the hunt of its most knowledgeable seeker. Over time, interest faded, and only occasional prospectors made attempts to find it. Nearly a century has passed, yet the mine remains hidden, waiting. Someday, perhaps, a stubborn reincarnation of Gid Whiteman will kick aside the right rock or turn over a long-rotted log, and at last, the final chapter of the lost cement mine will be written. If someone in Trinity County, California, were inclined to rob a train, they would find it quite the challenge. Railroads simply don't exist there. A would-be robber, even today, would need to settle for targeting a mule caravan instead. Two tales of such robberies have circulated throughout the county for over a century. These accounts, so similar in nature, have been combined here. Both describe holdups that occurred on Trinity Mountain in 1856. According to the widely accepted version, Richard H. Barter was a Canadian who made his way south through Oregon to the gold-rich Mother Lode country in central and eastern California. He eventually settled at a site along the American River known as Rattlesnake Bar. It was here that he earned the moniker Rattlesnake Dick Barter from fellow miners. However, Dick soon realized that gold mining was grueling work and concluded that it would be far easier and more lucrative to let others do the hard labor while he reaped the rewards. He relocated closer to Auburn and became a full-fledged bandit. Rattlesnake Dick wasn't a lone wolf. He assembled a gang to aid in his exploits. Among his most trusted associates was George Skinner, whom he made his lieutenant. George's brother, Cyrus, also joined the gang, as did Bill Carter, Adolph Newton, and a man named Romero. Together, these six formed the core of the Rattlesnake Dick gang. In the spring of 1856, Barter received word of a substantial shipment of raw gold being transported south from Scott Valley in Siskiyou County. Given his time in Oregon, it's likely Barter had a good understanding of the region's geography. He had entered California as part of a group traveling the Oregon Trail, passing west of Mount Shasta and following the Sacramento River's west bank into the lower valley. Initially, Barter planned to ambush the stagecoach carrying the gold along the newly completed road connecting the Oregon Trail to Lassen's Road near the Pitt River crossing. However, ongoing conflicts with Native American tribes forced travelers to abandon this route early in the year. Urgent construction began on a new road further west, widening an old pack trail to accommodate wagons. By spring, this new road stretched from Eureka to Callahan's, just north of Scott Mountain, and on toward French Gulch and the Tower House on Clear Creek. The route was treacherous. The steep descent near Clear Creek required teamsters to drag trees behind their wagons to prevent them from plunging into the river. It was along this perilous stretch, likely near Dodge Creek, that the holdup took place. Smaller contractors and packers were transporting goods and passengers over Scott Mountain to Trinity Center, where the trail crossed the Trinity River at Van Ness Ranch. From there, it climbed Trinity Mountain, traversed a low saddle near the peak, and descended steeply along Dodge Creek before following Clear Creek to Tower House at Willow Creek Fork. Although stagecoaches and freight wagons dispatched from Wells Fargo and Shasta City were beginning to replace mule trains, the road was still under construction. It wouldn't be completed as far as Scotts Mountain Creek until 1857, and it would take until 1859 to fully connect with Callahan's. Nonetheless, the unfinished road and rugged terrain made it an ideal setting for Rattlesnake Dick and his gang to strike. Rattlesnake Dick sent George Skinner and a few gang members to French Gulch ahead of the construction crews. Their task was to scout out a prime location to ambush a large gold shipment expected to pass through the area. At the time, small connecting companies like Rhodes and Whitney handled cargo along this route until it was transferred to major firms like Wells Fargo in Shasta City. It's likely that Rattlesnake Dick's gang targeted Rhodes and Whitney during this heist, as the company went bankrupt later that year, possibly due to this robbery. Skinner took 4 regulars from the gang, Carter, Newton, and Romero, and recruited an additional man, a Mexican stranger whose name was never known. The gang simply called him the Mexican. With Dick estimating the haul at $80,000 in gold, nearly 400 pounds at the gold prices of the late 1850s, the gang needed mules to transport the loot. Dick and George's brother Cyrus planned to steal unbranded mules from the valley to avoid suspicion, as using the pack company's animals with their distinctive brands would have been too risky. The gang likely traveled on foot after reaching the head of construction on Clear Creek. They climbed to the summit of Trinity Mountain, where they set up camp out of sight of the workers. A nearby spring provided fresh water, and the site was inconspicuous enough for them to pose as travelers if spotted before the pack train arrived. After scouting the area near the Trinity River, the lookout reported that settlers were scattered along the river, making it difficult to escape unnoticed with the loot. The current campsite seemed like the best option, being about 3 or 4 miles from the nearest settlement. Just below their camp, a bend in the trail offered a good spot for an ambush. The next morning, Skinner confirmed the location and ordered one of the men to keep watch from a rocky vantage point. He also moved the camp from the spring to a more concealed rocky area closer to the lookout. This camp was likely in Van Ness Gulch. The gang waited restlessly. They expected Dick and Cyrus to arrive with the mules and for the pack train to appear at any moment. When neither arrived, Skinner sent 2 men to retrace the trail and search for Dick and Cyrus, but they returned late in the evening without finding any sign of them. Finally, the lookout spotted the pack train approaching the grade. The bandits moved swiftly. The packers were tied to trees before they could react, and the mules were brought to the camp, stripped of their packs and stampeded out of sight. Their victory was short-lived. Newton, the lookout, saw the packers escape their bonds and flee. one of them heading straight for Shasta City to raise the alarm. Realizing a posse would soon be on their trail, the gang grew anxious. Skinner debated leaving immediately but knew they couldn't get far while carrying over 80 pounds of gold each. By the next morning, tensions ran high, especially for the Mexican, whose unease only added to the growing pressure on the group. Skinner, though equally eager to flee, understood they were now cornered. The Mexican's nerves finally broke. He begged Skinner to let him take his share of the gold and leave while there was still time, insisting he'd take his chances. Skinner, however, knew better than to let a panicked man loose. There was no telling who he might talk to or what trouble he could cause. Besides, Skinner needed every gun in case of a showdown. He firmly refused. The Mexican, convinced that Skinner wouldn't risk the sound of a gunshot that could give away their position, rose defiantly and drew his knife, declaring that no one would stop him. Share or no share, he was leaving. Skinner acted swiftly, shooting the Mexican point blank and killing him instantly. The gang now had no choice but to act quickly. The sound of the shot would surely have been heard, and the posse was likely already closing in. With Dick and Cyrus still missing and no sign of their arrival, Skinner and the others hastily decided to hide half the gold and attempt to carry the rest. This meant each man would need to haul about 50 pounds. Skinner took 2 of the packs of gold and disappeared into the rocky terrain to stash them, taking precious time to hide the loot. While he could have hidden it almost anywhere on the steep hillside, it's likely that he either marked the location carefully for future retrieval or deliberately stayed away long enough to confuse the others. When Skinner returned to camp, he refused to reveal where he had hidden the gold. Instead, he ordered the remaining gang members to pack up and move out. He instructed each man to travel alone and promised to meet them later at their hideout near Folsom. Following Skinner's instructions, the outlaws likely stole horses or wagons at the first opportunity. All of them eventually reached the hideout safely, but there was still no sign of Rattlesnake Dick or Cyrus Skinner. Worried, the gang decided to head toward Auburn to look for their missing comrades. On their way, they stopped at Jack Phillips' place along the Folsom-Auburn Road, a spot where Dick was known to frequent. However, the packer who had escaped during the robbery had already alerted Wells Fargo in Shasta City, and the agent had dispatched a man named Barkley to stake out Phillips' place. Sure enough, when Skinner and the gang arrived, Barkley and his posse ambushed them. A fierce gunfight broke out. George Skinner was killed instantly. Romero was badly wounded, but managed to flee into the underbrush, only to be caught by Barkley while trying to swim across the American River. Carter and Newton surrendered without further resistance. The 3 surviving bandits were taken to Folsom to stand trial. Romero and Newton were convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Carter, however, turned state's evidence and led authorities to a nearby cave where $40,000 of the gang's loot was hidden. As a result, Carter was released. Meanwhile, Rattlesnake Dick and Cyrus Skinner had been captured earlier. On the night of the robbery, they were caught red-handed at a mule corral and had been locked up in the Auburn jail ever since. George Skinner's death meant that the directions to the $40,000 in gold he had hidden on Trinity Mountain were lost forever. Carter's story provided enough details for the authorities to keep him under surveillance for a long time, but he was never seen attempting to recover the missing gold. Searches were conducted as far north as Trinity Mountain, but the stash was never found. To this day, it is believed that the $40,000 in gold remains hidden somewhere on the western slope of Trinity Mountain. By 1856, William Bill Loudon had already established himself as a notable figure in Trinity County. He was a miner, rancher, master mason, and an officer in the state militia. He was also a man of action, willing to pursue justice with determination. While it's unclear under what authority he acted in this particular case, it's believed that Bill served as a special deputy for the Trinity County Sheriff. This story unfolds in March 1856, the same year as another infamous robbery, and in nearly the same location. Once again, 5 men comprised the bandit gang. In this version, the central figure is Carter. Bill Loudon had good reason to believe Carter was a fellow fraternity member, though from a separate lodge, and this belief seemed to trouble him throughout his life. Carter's name was one Bill never forgot. Bill's involvement began when a packer named Solomon D. Barstow reached Shasta City with news of a robbery and sought Bill's help in pursuing the outlaws. Barstow also suspected a local gambler in Trinity County. Acting quickly, Bill apprehended and questioned the man, but satisfied that he wasn't involved, released him. The holdup itself occurred on March 12, 1856. Barstow, working for Rhodes and Whitney Express Company, was leading a group of 5 messengers transporting gold from Eureka to Shasta City. Their cargo, worth a total of $18,000, was to be signed over to Wells Fargo upon arrival. Barstow carried $10,000, Hillman had $31,000, and the other 3 men carried smaller amounts of $1,000 each. After crossing the Trinity River, the group was ambushed by 5 highwaymen who stripped them of their gold dust and tied them to trees out of sight of the trail. The bandits also drove off their saddle animals. During the holdup, Hillman recognized one of the outlaws as Carter. In a moment of desperation, Hillman gave Carter a fraternal handshake, which Carter recognized. Carter promised to tie Hillman's hands loosely if he agreed not to raise the alarm or attempt to escape for 3 hours. Hillman reluctantly agreed, allowing the bandits to escape with the gold. Once the agreed time had passed, Hillman freed himself and the others. One man was sent back to Eureka to raise the alarm, while Barstow and the rest continued on foot to Shasta City. Barstow then summoned Bill Loudon to help track down the robbers. Barstow and Hillman remained in Shasta City in case the bandits turned up there, while Bill set out for Red Bluff to investigate 3 suspects seen in the area. On arrival, he learned that the suspects had already moved south along the Sacramento River. Bill pursued them, and in Tehama, discovered that only 2 of the men had been spotted there. Locals believed they had continued further south along the river's west bank. At Tehama, Bill joined forces with a Butte County Deputy Sheriff, Fred Peelsticker. The 2 men rode south to Walsh's ranch to investigate a report of a stolen horse. The rancher confirmed that a horse, saddle, and bridle had been taken 2 nights earlier. With a fresh mount from the rancher, Bill and Fred continued their pursuit down the river, reaching Monroeville. However, they lost the trail there. Doubling back, the deputies returned to a location near the mouth of Chico Creek, where they had earlier seen a boat tied up. Suspecting the suspects had crossed the river, they paid the boat's owner to ferry them across, while their saddle horses swam behind. Once across, Bill and Fred headed east toward John Bidwell's ranch. About half a mile inland, they encountered a group of men clearing land. One of these workers provided them with a crucial clue that would advance their pursuit. The worker informed the deputies that further up the river was a cabin that, while owned by one man, was often occupied by others whose activities seemed suspicious. Intrigued, Bill Loudon decided to investigate. Following the workers' directions, the deputies soon spotted the cabin with a thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney, suggesting it was occupied. They tethered their horses out of sight and approached the cabin cautiously, revolvers in hand. Rushing the door, they found the cabin empty. Inside, a log smoldered in the fireplace, producing the smoke they had seen. While Bill searched the cabin for evidence, Fred Peelsticker went outside to investigate the sound of wood chopping nearby. In one corner of the cabin, Bill discovered a locked carpenter's chest. Using a nearby pick, he pried it open. On the top tray, he found a small box containing letters. Among them was one that caught his attention, an appeal for help, and the rescue of some men confined in the Auburn jail. Bill pocketed the letter just as Fred returned with the woodchopper, an elderly and nearly deaf man. Communication with the old man was difficult, but they eventually learned that the cabin belonged to a man named Sloan. The cabin, often used by travelers heading between the mines and San Francisco, served as a stopping point where Sloan sometimes lent or rented horses for the journey to Marysville, accompanying riders to retrieve the animals. The old man added that Sloan had left with another man during the previous night and wasn't expected back until the next day. Suspecting they were on the right track, the deputies inspected the horses in Sloan's corral and identified one with Walsh's brand, confirming their suspicions. The trail led them toward Marysville, but Fred became violently ill within 2 miles of the town, forcing Bill to assist him the rest of the way. Once there, Bill secured a hotel room and summoned a doctor for his partner. After caring for the horses, Bill met with Captain King, the city marshal, who informed him that Carter, the man traveling with Sloan, had been arrested earlier that morning. Carter was already on his way to Shasta, escorted by a deputy. Though it was late at night, Bill and the marshal began searching Marysville for Sloan, suspecting him to be part of the gang, or at least connected as the keeper of one of their hideouts. By daylight, Sloan still hadn't been located. It then occurred to the lawmen to check for Sloan's horses. Finding them in a local stable, they assigned a deputy to watch the animals, reasoning that Sloan would eventually return for them. Their hunch paid off. While inspecting the stable, they questioned a worker who pointed them to the hayloft, where Sloan was sleeping. Bill and King called out for him, but when they received no answer, they climbed up to the loft. Sloan attempted to resist but was quickly subdued. The deputies arrested him and transported him to Shasta via the same route they had taken. They arrived by midday, where they found Carter had already spoken with Solomon Barstow and Hillman. Carter confessed that, believing they were being closely pursued, the gang had hidden most of their stolen gold along one of the tributaries of Clear Creek, likely Whitney Creek. This stream, south of the main trail, was relatively easy to reach from Dodge Creek in the ridge. Carter explained that the loot had been divided among the gang members as evenly as possible, using the original saddlebags from the express company. Hillman also shared with Bill the story of the handshake he'd exchanged with Carter during the robbery. Carter, hoping for leniency, agreed to turn state's evidence. Barstow, Hillman, and Bill worked to secure him a lighter sentence in exchange for his cooperation. Bill joined a sheriff's posse to search for the hidden gold. Clear Creek, a winding watercourse leading into the hills, offered many possible hiding spots. As the posse made its way upstream, disagreements broke out among the men over which direction Carter and his gang might have taken. The arguments only served to confuse Carter further, as he was already unfamiliar with the back trail. By nightfall, tensions within the posse were running high. Many of the men believed that Carter was intentionally leading them on a wild goose chase to create an opportunity to escape. Their frustration boiled over, and some even suggested hanging him on the spot before returning to town. Bill Loudon, however, firmly disagreed. He believed Carter was being truthful and urged the posse to quiet down and give Carter the space to think clearly. Bill assured them he would take full responsibility for ensuring Carter didn't escape, but warned that anyone who tried to harm him would have to deal with Bill himself. With that settled, the posse set up camp. That night, Bill enjoyed his first proper sleep in 5 days, managing to get 6 hours of rest. The next morning, the group resumed their search at first light. Around mid-morning, Bill and Carter passed a lone pine tree standing in a small flat below the trail. Carter stopped and pointed to a fallen tree nearby. "My money is buried under that old snag," he told Bill, just a little way out toward the standing tree. The entire posse descended into the flat. Snow had fallen since the gold had been buried, and it had to be cleared away before they could dig. After examining a few spots along the log, they finally uncovered the cache. Wood rats had gnawed holes in the buckskin sacks, and some of the gold had spilled out. The first cache contained nearly $6,000. Carter speculated that his two companions had also hidden their shares of the loot in the same ravine. Leading the posse further down, he pointed out the spot where he had rejoined the others after burying his own gold. From there, he guided them back up the gulch about half a mile to the point where the group had initially split up. The posse conducted a thorough search of the half-mile stretch of canyon. While exploring the hillside, Bill noticed a freshly notched branch in the brush. Bending the limb, he aligned it with the direction of the cache and found the second stash of gold nearby. Close by, he located the third cache as well. These two discoveries yielded an additional $17,000, bringing the total recovery to about $23,000. Among the recovered gold was a marked sack belonging to Hillman, containing roughly $7,000. However, $8,000 of the stolen gold remained unaccounted for. The posse returned to Shasta City with Carter and the recovered gold. Since the robbery had occurred in Trinity County, Bill took Carter and another prisoner, Sloan, to Weaverville, the county seat, and handed them over to the sheriff. While in Marysville earlier, Bill had given Marshal King the letter he found in Sloan's cabin. King forwarded it to the sheriff's office in Auburn, where the gang mentioned in the letter had already been apprehended. When Bill later visited King in Marysville, the marshal informed him that the sheriff had located the men mentioned in the letter near Folsom. During the arrest attempt, one man was killed, and the other, severely wounded, fell into the river and was presumed drowned. Hearing this, Bill concluded that the sheriff's actions would likely keep any remaining members of the gang in hiding for some time. He decided to end his pursuit and return home. If the gangs mentioned in both versions of the story were indeed one and the same, the timeline would align as follows. Rattlesnake Dick Barter and Cyrus Skinner were still in the Auburn jail following their failed attempt to steal mules. George Skinner and Romero were likely the men in the tent near Folsom. Carter, Newton, and Romero were eventually sent to prison. Carter reportedly died 2 years later, while Newton and Romero served out their 10-year sentences. The Mexican gang member had been killed earlier by George Skinner, leaving 7 members in total. Subsequent reports suggest that 2 more gang members were arrested later, possibly Romero and Newton. Sloan was released, and another report indicates Carter may have been released as well. Despite Loudon recovering $23,000 of the original $31,000, Rhodes and Whitney Express Company went bankrupt, possibly due to the losses. Barstow and some of the other couriers later joined Wells Fargo. The missing $8,000 may have been part of what Barkley recovered near Folsom, aligning with George Skinner's suspected share. If that's the case, the company's financial loss might not have been as severe as first believed. Bill Loudon recorded this account in 1907, 50 years after the events, at the age of 76. Minor details may have faded over time, but his story provides valuable insight into the era's events. He passed away on January 10, 1912, at the age of 81 after a long and active life. As for Rattlesnake Dick, his outlaw career ended definitively on July 11, 1859, when he was killed during another attempted robbery. With his death came the final end of the Rattlesnake Dick gang. Some experts believe that 25% of all precious metals and gems ever discovered have been lost. Part of these treasures went down with large ships transporting them through natural disasters, or were buried by those who later couldn't recover their wealth. With the regulation of rivers, many alleged treasure sites are disappearing under large bodies of water. One such site is in Northern California, along the American River, where a huge dam is being constructed. The branches of this river run through deep, narrow valleys, making the area ideal for dam construction. It was also perfect for gold prospecting and hiding the gold that was found. On the South Fork of the American River lies the town of Coloma, where gold was first discovered in California by James Marshall in the winter of 1848. When the gold rush began in 1849, all the tributaries of the American River were overrun with miners. It's estimated that during the California gold rush, more than 50,000 miners prospected the state's streams and riverbanks. The north and middle forks of the American River were particularly crowded with mining camps. Thousands of items were undoubtedly left behind by these prospectors. Once the new dam is completed, the backwaters will extend over 20 miles, covering all of these old camps. Any efforts to explore the treasure sites in the area will have to be immediate, as the land along the lake's edge is being sold for housing. In one particular location around Volcanoville, a ghost town now, but once a bustling community during the gold rush with a population of several thousand, including 5,000 Chinese miners, there are known treasure sites. At least 3 events may account for 15 or 20 different treasure sites in the vicinity of the old town. The Chinese miners were disliked by the white miners because of their slow but effective methods of retrieving gold. They patiently worked every inch of ground, even reworking claims abandoned by the white miners. From these overlooked claims, they extracted thousands of ounces of gold left behind by those who were too greedy and hurried to gather more riches. The Chinese miners often formed companies and divided their gold among themselves as they accumulated wealth. Each individual was responsible for his own share. Distrusting the white man and his banks, the Chinese miners would place their gold into opium bottles or other small containers and bury them near their camps. One tragic event occurred during the 1870s when a group of miners got drunk at a local saloon, then rounded up several Chinese miners and drove them into a cabin, setting it on fire. When the Chinese miners tried to escape, They were either shot or forced back into the burning building. None survived. Some old-timers claimed that 7 Chinese miners were killed, while others said as many as 15 perished. Whether they carried their gold with them or buried it near their cabins, several treasure sites likely exist as a result of this massacre. Another incident took place in the 1890s. Some Chinese miners were working along the middle fork of the American River, digging for gold. While a group of 12 was working in their excavation, the sides of their dig caved in, burying them alive. They suffocated before their fellow miners could rescue them. The buried gold from these tragic events remains lost, hidden somewhere in the wilderness around Volcanoville, waiting to be discovered. The gold that the Chinese miners had already mined and buried is still waiting to be discovered by some fortunate treasure hunter. However, not all the gold buried around Volcanoville was left by miners. Several Chinese men had other occupations. One such man ran a prosperous general store. After making his fortune, he sold his holdings to another Chinese businessman, left the gold country, and returned to China. But in case he ever wanted to return, he buried part of his gold before leaving. Years later, he did come back to Volcanoville to retrieve his hidden treasure. However, during his absence, the town had burned down, and all the landmarks he used to identify his cache had vanished. Despite numerous attempts over the years, he never found his gold. It's likely still buried somewhere around Volcanoville, waiting to be unearthed. These incidents occurred within the old town site, but Volcanoville wasn't the only place where tragedy and murder left hidden treasures. Many mining camps scattered along the American River contributed to the lore of lost riches. The problem for modern treasure hunters is finding Volcanoville itself. The town suffered more than one devastating fire, and as a result, the precise location of the original town site is now lost to history. Anyone who attempts to search for the treasure left near the old town will have miles of riverbank to explore. However, a patient treasure hunter armed with a good metal detector could still strike gold. Additionally, bottle and relic collectors have a good chance of making a find. Occasionally, people come across a few old bottles, but a major discovery is yet to be made. For those adventurous enough to search for treasure at Volcanoville, the best starting point is Auburn, California, located 33 miles northeast of Sacramento. From Auburn, California State Highway 49 leads to the small town of Cool, where the paved road turns left toward Georgetown. In the heart of Georgetown, a left turn onto a paved highway leads 9 miles to a dirt road marked by a sign pointing to Volcanoville. From there, it's another 9 miles to reach Volcanoville. Fortunately, the county highway department maintains the road, making it accessible to any car traveling to the town site. However, it's essential to note that the entire town site is now private property. To hunt for treasure, visitors must first obtain permission from the owners, Mrs. Fraser and her son Jim. They are known to be gracious hosts, especially considering their long-standing connection to the town's history. When Jim was a child, his father and uncles told him about the Chinese miners who were burned alive in the cabin. Mrs. Fraser herself remembers the old Chinese man who returned, crippled with arthritis and relying on 2 canes, searching for the gold he had buried so many years before. As a young girl, she would watch him hobble along, determined yet unsuccessful in his quest. For years, Mrs. Fraser kept a newspaper clipping about the 12 Chinese miners who were buried alive in their mine, another tragic incident, adding to the mystery of the area. The Frasers' interest in the treasure stories has never faded. Their memories of the old mining days continue to attract serious treasure hunters to Volcanoville, all of them hoping to uncover the lost riches hidden beneath the soil. The town of Murrieta and nearby Murrieta Hot Springs were named after Don Juan Murrieta, who was born in Santurce, Spain. At age 18, in 1863, he immigrated to the United States and began life on a ranch. Preoccupied with his business endeavors, Murrieta didn't become a naturalized citizen until 1876. He initially herded sheep in California's San Joaquin Valley, but by the mid-1870s, he had moved south into what was then San Diego County. In the spring of 1875, Murrieta, along with partners Zanjuro and Pujol, purchased the vast Temecula and Paba ranchos, together spanning 52,000 acres, for just $1 per acre. The trio were the first sheepmen to enter Temecula Valley, a region that now lies in the heart of Riverside County. After his portion of the rancho was subdivided in 1886, Murrieta took a position as chief deputy of the Civil Division in the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office. This was a volatile time in the city's history, teetering on the edge of lawlessness. Murrieta served faithfully in this role for 39 years, retiring on July 1, 1927, at the age of 81. In 1894, he was 49 years old, known not only for his professionalism, but also for his crisp clothing and signature ivory-handled revolver slung low in a polished holster. Frank Dowler, then sheriff of Palmdale, wrote in his diary, "All you had to do to get along with Murrieta was mind your own business and avoid making a nuisance of yourself." In January 1894, the year of the first major railroad strike, Dowler contacted Murrieta for help in locating a fugitive named Albert Failing, a former chemist from New York. Failing had escaped from the Palmdale jail while being held on charges connected to a past robbery of a westbound St. Louis and San Francisco railroad train. Dowler's notes describe Failing as 5 feet 11.5 inches tall, weighing 153 pounds, with hazel eyes and a thin mustache. A frail-looking man, Dowler remarked that Failing appeared as if he had narrowly avoided death more than once. Escaping with Failing were 2 Mexican bandits, Juan Romero and Hector Gonzalez, both wanted for multiple murders. Dowler believed the trio was traveling together, noting in his diary, "The 2 Mex are to be considered dangerous." Oddly, no reward was listed for the 2 Mexicans, but a $100 bounty was offered for Failing, as well as for his train-robbing accomplices, W. Haight and Tom Weaver. All 5 outlaws were believed to be somewhere near the Temecula Rancho, later renamed Murrieta Hot Springs. The story of their crimes tied back to the infamous Great Express robbery of 1886. On October 25th of that year, a man carrying a valise boarded the express car of a departing train at St. Louis Union Depot. He handed a note to Adams Express messenger, David S. Frothingham. The letter, supposedly signed by R.A.J.B. Barrett and backed by a pass from W.H. Damsel, the express company's superintendent, authorized passage to Pierce City. At the time, deadhead riding was a common practice among Adams Express employees, so Frothingham accepted the documents without question. Moments later, he realized his mistake. The man struck him, stole his .38 revolver, bound and gagged him, and claimed to be the outlaw Jim Cummings, a reputed member of the Jesse James gang. Using Frothingham's key, the robber opened the express safe and took $57,000 in cash and $20,000 in negotiable securities. As a final insult, he stuffed a few silver coins into the unconscious messenger's pockets and leapt from the train at Marshall's Crossing. When the train reached St. Clair and Frothingham was finally freed, coins spilled from his pockets, leaving no doubt that a bold and highly orchestrated robbery had taken place. After the daring train robbery, Adams Express messenger David S. Frothingham gave his account of the holdup, but the silver coins found in his pockets cast doubt on his innocence. He described the outlaw as 6 feet tall, hazel-eyed and thin as a whisper, a peculiar description that didn't match the real Jim Cummings, the infamous bandit he claimed had robbed the train. Authorities grew suspicious. Frothingham, insisting he was a victim, was nonetheless arrested and charged as a conspirator in the robbery. Then came an unexpected twist. A few days after the crime, the St. Louis Globe-Democrat received a letter signed by Jim Cummings. Inside was a detailed confession and 2 wrappers from the stolen money. The writer claimed he had checked a pistol in a billy club at the St. Louis Union Depot baggage room. Pinkerton detectives retrieved both items, along with scraps of 2 popular ballads, The Rock Island Railroad and A Man You Don't Meet Every Day. One of the song sheets had an address that had been erased, but not quite well enough. Through sharp detective work and discreet surveillance, suspicion soon landed on a Chicago coal dealer named Fred Whitrock. Investigators connected him to W. Haight, a former Adams Express employee who had been fired for theft. Pinkerton agents placed Haight under 24-hour surveillance in St. Louis. On Christmas Eve, 1886, agents arrested Whitrock in a Chicago saloon at Lincoln and Madison Streets. He confessed, and implicated Albert Failing, claiming Failing had taken off with $2,500 in silver coins. Soon after, Haight and another accomplice, Tom Weaver, were also arrested. All three stood trial and were convicted. Whitrock confessed in full, and all the stolen money was accounted for, except the $2,500 that Failing allegedly disappeared with. Whitrock and Haight received 7-year sentences in Missouri State Prison, while Weaver got 5. Frothingham, after spending 7 months in jail, was eventually acquitted on May 4, 1887. As for Albert Failing, he vanished. Years passed. In 1893, Murrieta Hot Springs, formerly part of San Diego County, was incorporated into the newly formed Riverside County. With the railroad connection to San Diego now broken, the town settled into relative obscurity. That is, until Failing resurfaced. One night in a Palmdale saloon, an inebriated Failing couldn't help himself. He began bragging about his role in the legendary Great Express robbery of 1886. "That was the clincher," wrote Sheriff Frank Dowler in his diary. "I strapped on my .45 Colt and set out to trim the population by one." Failing, too drunk to resist, was taken into custody and jailed in Palmdale, awaiting the arrival of Pinkerton agents from San Francisco. He was locked up alongside 2 other prisoners, Mexican outlaws Juan Romero and Hector Gonzalez. The next morning, Dowler questioned Failing. At first, he denied everything, but as the interrogation wore on, his resolve crumbled. He confessed that he'd spent about $1,000 of the loot, but had hidden the remaining $1,500 in various places over the years. It was too heavy to carry around. His most recent hiding place? A hill near the California Southern Railroad station at Murrieta Hot Springs. Dowler and Failing agreed they would ride out the next morning to recover the silver. But morning came, and the jailhouse was empty. The 3 prisoners had escaped. They had pried loose some rotted floorboards and vanished into the night, stealing 3 horses from a nearby corral. But Dowler wasn't easily fooled. He figured Failing would go straight for his buried treasure, assuming the outlaw had told the truth. Dowler boarded the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe train and rode to Murrieta Station. He spent the next 2 days quietly watching the town, waiting. Then, at last, he spotted Juan Romero and Hector Gonzalez. The press and horticulturist reported, when the 2 Mexican bandits learned that Dowler was hunting them, they cut for the high country. Juan Romero and Hector Gonzalez fled into the rugged wilderness, weaving across Murrieta Creek and heading into the northern slopes of the Santa Rosa Mountains, just 6 miles south of Lake Elsinore. Sheriff Frank Dowler, undeterred, borrowed a horse from a local livery stable and rode after them. He trailed the outlaws along the foothills to the head of Temecula Canyon, where he finally caught up with them. From a high ridge overlooking their camp, Dowler drew his revolver and shouted a final warning: surrender or die. The desperados went for their guns. Moments later, the canyon echoed with gunfire. When the smoke cleared, both bandits lay lifeless in the dust. Before burying them in the anonymous soil of Temecula Canyon, Dowler took photographs of their bodies, images later found in his personal diary, to claim the reward bounty. That night he stayed with a friend working the Good Hope mine, but his pursuit wasn't over. The next day, Dowler picked up the trail of Albert Failing again, following it into Terracotta City, only to lose him once more. To avoid detection, Failing assumed a new identity. He found work under the name David Brown at the California Coal and Clay Company. Then, in October 1891, he abruptly left his job and disappeared again. Years passed without a trace. It wasn't until late 1897, while drilling wells for a new pipeline in Terracotta, that Failing's path crossed fate once more. A laborer mentioned to Dowler that a man calling himself Henry Platt bore an uncanny resemblance to the wanted posters still tacked to the wall of the local post office. That very afternoon, Dowler waited outside the company's office. When Platt stepped outside, Dowler drew his revolver and ordered him to freeze. But Failing reached for his weapon, and Dowler fired twice in rapid succession. According to the Elsinore Press, the shots rang out so close together they sounded like a single crack of thunder. Failing fell dead on the spot. The buried silver, however, was never found. In the pages of Dowler's diary lies the only known clue: The loot is still buried near the Murrieta train station, as far as I know. In those days, in a region where formal law held little weight, Frank Dowler's word was law and gospel. Long before Riverside County was carved out of San Diego County, his judgment reigned supreme. Some say it still should. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to read the original article or purchase the magazine from which it was taken, please check out our website, truetalesofburiedtreasure.com.